Good evening. Welcome to Singapore Tonight. I'm Dawn Tan. Our top story tonight, for the first time in Singapore, a man has donated part of his liver to a stranger. The transplant was successfully performed at the National University Hospital in March this year. June Low with the story.
16-year-old Lim Si Jia and 54-year-old Lim Kok Sing only met each other 3 weeks ago, but both shared a special connection. And to express her gratitude to Mr. Lim, Si Jia folded paper cranes and made a card just for him. The teenager received about 60% of Mr. Lim's liver in March this year in a surgery that took some 10 hours. Si Jia was diagnosed with glycogen storage disease when she turned 8. This means that she's not able to break down the body's store of sugar in her liver. She was placed on the national waiting list for organs 4 years ago. But it wasn't until January this year that Mr. Lim's liver was found to be a good match.
I really admire his courage and determination to step forward and donate to someone whom he doesn't even know, a stranger. And yeah, I'm really grateful and glad that he made up his mind to donate his liver.
For Mr. Lim, becoming an organ donor was something he had decided early on. He had voluntarily signed up to be a donor even before the Human Organ Transplant Act was passed in 1987. He's also been a volunteer in clinical trials for the past decade and has even pledged his body to be used for research purposes after his death.
I have already lived for half a century. I've seen enough in life and been through enough in life, and I also have my fair share of blessings, and I just want to pass on this simple act of blessing to someone who is in need of a new life.
Mr. Lim stepped forward to donate in January last year, as he knew that 55 was the recommended cutoff age to be a living donor. As it was the first time that someone had offered to donate an organ to a complete stranger, surgeons said the biggest challenge was at the policy level.
This is the first time, somebody who is non-directed, and so for MOH to decide how do we proceed with this. How do we decide who is going to be the recipient, who will meet the cost of the initial investigations. So all these were, because the whole thing was a new endeavor, I think all these had to be, so multiple meetings had to be had.
According to doctors at the National University Hospital, glycogen storage disease affects only 1 in 100,000 people globally. And in Singapore, there are fewer than 20 families affected by the hereditary disease. And while it's not life-threatening, complications which arise from it would cause problems for patients.
Because they are unable to break down glycogen to glucose. And our brain, our metabolism, glucose is the main source of energy for our metabolism. If they live with prolonged low glucose level, they can be mentally handicapped.
Both Si Jia and Mr. Lim are recovering well, but the teenager will require long-term medication to ensure her body does not reject the donated organ.
Now, for more on liver transplants, we're joined in the studio by Dr. Desmond Wai. He's a gastroenterologist and hepatologist at Mount Elizabeth Novena Hospital. Dr. Wai, welcome. So in that story that we just saw, the donor was 54 years old. That's just a year shy of the 55-year age limit for donors. How important is age as a factor in determining the suitability of a donor?
It is not the most important factor. Actually, it is what we call the physiological age. That means how the body is functioning rather than the real age that is important. But as we go older, our body reserve get less and less, so 55 years old is a reasonable cutoff.
Right, so our physiological age, meaning we could be younger than we are than the calendar date, correct?
That's right.
Depending on our health. Okay. So the procedure itself does carry risks, of course. Are there any long-term effects that can occur, especially for either for the donee or the donor?
For the donor, we are taking about 40 to 60% of the healthy liver to donate. But our liver had a tremendous potential to regenerate. So after organ donation, actually 2 months later, the liver volume will become back to 100%. And the piece of liver that has been donated to the donor, in this case is young lady, it will also grow from 60% to 100%. So 1 become 2.
So in this case, it was 60% of the liver that was donated?
I understand it is 60%. Yeah.
Right. That is the maximum amount you just mentioned. So, you know, the donor actually did donate half his liver. So what happens now for him, the recovery process? I mean, what will he be going through?
Actually, he'll be quite fine. It is a big operation, so it should be done for people that, like at NUH, that they do liver surgery on a regular basis. So he needs to rest for about 1 to 2 months. But the liver had a lot of reserve. We actually only require 25% of the liver to survive. So if he donates 60%, he still has 40% that is more than the minimum requirement for us to survive. So he'll be all right. He probably feel tired after work for 1 or 2 months, but he'll be eating and walking around after 3 or 4 days after the surgery, and he'll be discharged about a week after the surgery. In 2 months' time, his liver size is back to normal, and he can resume his normal duty, his normal work.
Right. So the issue of liver transplants is one that, you know, is much talked about in the medical world. Patients can be waiting for years before, you know, sort of getting one that's suitable for them. In the case of this teenager, I believe she waited up to 4 years. We do know that you can have a donation, as it were, from a living person or from somebody who's deceased. Is there a difference fundamentally in you know, being the recipient of either in either one of those two cases?
Of course, it's ideal to get a liver from a deceased person because it poses no risk to the donor. The donor is technically dead. So we take half of the liver from that person to donate to a person in need is ideal. But the number of deceased donor organ donation in Singapore is still low compared to Western Europe or Northern America. Right. So that having live donor organ transplant helps to shorten the queue, save more life, and improve people's quality of life.
So it really is an issue of a lack of donors, isn't it? You know, as we mentioned just now, the patient was waiting 4 years for her. So why this lack of donors?
I think there are many reasons for that. We are being Asians. Our culture is to keep the body intact. Number one. Number two is that there may be a lot of people not aware that after organ donation, they can go back to normal living, normal life with very little problem 2 months after the surgery.
So what do you think can be done feasibly, Dr. Wai, in terms of raising that awareness then? Because it seems quite clear-cut, but there are risks obviously involved if you're going to be a donor. But what should people know?
I think people should know that we can change a patient's life, we can prolong their life, we can make them have a better quality of life, and the risk to the donor is relatively small.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Wai, for coming in to share that insight with us. I've been speaking there with Dr. Desmond Wai, gastroenterologist and hepatologist at Mount Elizabeth Novena Hospital. Moving on now.